In early November of 1997, there were a series of very strange sessions that led a child psychologist in Maine to contact the local authorities. It began when a patient of his started to tell him about one of their friends. According to the psychiatrist and the boy's parents, this friend was imaginary. He called his friend Mr. Smile, and he would talk about him at a great length during some sessions. The boy called him Mr. Smile both because he would always be smiling and because when he was around the boy, he said everything felt happy. He said that there was a feeling of everything being okay. The boy in question was being treated for serious issues to do with anger and depression, but when Mr. Smile was around, he said all that anger and sadness seemed to just disappear. He said that Mr. Smile wouldn't speak, but rather just stand there at the foot of his bed. He smelt like candy floss, and just by being there, he made the boy feel calm and safe. The psychiatrist assumed this imaginary friend was just some sort of coping mechanism that the boy had developed to deal with the problems at home, until another patient, a girl of about 9 years old, began talking about her imaginary friend, also named Mr. Smile, and then a boy of 7, and a boy of 12, and a girl of 11. All in all, close to 15 separate patients all began to talk about him, Mr. Smile. The first he'd put down as a coincidence. After all, many children have imaginary friends, and the name and description of Mr. Smile was just generic enough that it didn't concern him too much at all. But as more and more of his patients told him about said Mr. Smile, he began to grow very concerned. He asked for more details. Every single one of them described him the same way, using the same exact words. Now, there was no way that all of these children could be in contact with each other. 5 of them, for instance, were currently being homeschooled, and according to their parents, when he spoke to them, they never really left the house, unless it was to accompany them on shopping trips. There was no way that all of these kids could have rehearsed or prepared their statements all together, which led him to a deeply disturbing conclusion. He spoke privately with each of the children's parents, one at a time. He avoided disclosing too much info, but told them that something troubling had cropped up in multiple sessions with various patients, and that he believed there was a chance their child may be at risk. He asked for their permission to discuss the matters with the authorities, and each parent gave their consent, provided they were kept in the loop as to what was going on. And so, over the course of the next week, the police came and talked to the children about their friend. They asked for details about his appearance, how he got into the house, anything he said or did while there, because by this point, the psychiatrists, the parents, and the police were all convinced that Mr. Smile was quite real and very dangerous. The authorities had checked to make sure there were no known predators living in the area, which they had confirmed was not the case, but it was quite clear that whoever this Mr. Smile was, he was a very real person who had been sneaking into the homes of these children late at night. None of the children claimed to know how he actually got in. They said they would just wake up and he'd be there at the foot of their bed. Sometimes they said he would be singing something, but not in a language they could understand. It sounded like a lullaby and made them feel safe. Finally, the children were asked to draw Mr. Smile, as they couldn't put it into words how he looked. Each and every one of the children would pick up a red crayon and proceed to color in the entire page until it was just a rectangle of red. When asked about this, they insisted that they had drawn Mr. Smile. When asked, where's his head, arms, legs, they would insist they had drawn them. They claimed that they had drawn a perfect picture of the man at the foot of their bed, and when they were told they had simply colored in the page and not drawn anything at all, they became deeply angry, feeling that they were being accused of lying and insisting that what they had drawn was a picture of the man they had seen. Acting more on a hunch than anything else, the psychiatrist decided to show one of the colored-in rectangles to the various children. He asked them, "What is this?" Each and every one of them, with no knowledge of what the picture was supposed to be or who had drawn it, replied, "That is Mr. Smile." Cameras and baby monitors were then placed in the children's room so that they could be monitored. Many of the parents simply stopped sleeping altogether, staying up all night staring at the screens that displayed where their children had slept. At no point did anyone enter or exit the bedrooms. No sounds except for them snoring or occasionally talking in their sleep were heard over the baby monitors. There was no sign of Mr. Smile. After almost 2 weeks of this, many of them began to doubt that Mr. Smile even existed. Other psychiatrists since have put the whole thing down to some strange shared delusion that, while it couldn't be explained, yet had no basis in reality. Some suggested that maybe this whole Mr. Smile thing had its basis in a TV show or a film that they had all watched, leading them to dream up something very similar to one another. Then, one of the boys went missing. The camera in his room had gone dead at around 2 in the morning. His mother had run to check in on him only to find his room completely empty. It had literally taken her less than a minute to run towards his room. There was no possible way for him to leave or be taken and be out of her sight in that time. It took her literally a minute to get to the bedroom, so where did he go? She said there was a smell like cotton candy throughout the room, something that didn't feel right. The search for the boy turned up nothing. No one had seen anything strange or unusual around the home before or during the disappearance, and no trace of him was ever found. It was less than a week later that one of the girls who had spoken of Mr. Smile vanished as well. Then another, then another. One by one, each of them began to disappear, until only 4 children remained. The 4 remaining children began to talk about how Mr. Smile and his friends were going to take them away soon. When asked about these friends, they talked about how Mr. Smile lived with other smiling men in the happy place, and that he would take them there very soon. They said that there were lots of people already there in the happy place, and everything was beautiful. They said that they knew about it because Mr. Smile talked to them in their heads. Because, well, he couldn't talk to them like normal people. He would only show them pictures in their heads of the place they were going. Things began to get incredibly disturbing. After a few weeks, the children began complaining of headaches and nausea. Their schools reported that they had begun to suffer hallucinations, and 2 of them started complaining that they didn't like the place Mr. Smile was showing them. One began screaming for half an hour, acting as if they were having a fit, and screaming that the colors will not stop. The colors were horrible, and they wanted them to go away. One of the children claimed that Mr. Smile was talking to them in their head all the time, and now was telling them very dark things, terrible things, but they couldn't talk about it. They mustn't, because then their parents would know about the terrible things too. The psychiatrist asked them to write down what Mr. Smile was saying, promising that he would show it to no one, managing to gain the trust of one of the boys. The contents of the book are known only to him and the authorities, but whenever anyone involved has been asked about it, they get very quiet and quickly find an excuse to change the subject. The children began to stop sleeping. Footage from the security camera showed them sitting bolt upright, their eyes unblinking, just staring at the wall without moving or making a sound. Sedatives did nothing. One of the girls began cutting strange circular marks into her skin, while 2 of the boys ceased communication in English altogether. The language they spoke was never identified, and despite numerous people being asked to listen to them, they could not translate what they were saying. By the start of 1999, all 4 of the children had vanished into thin air. There was no trace of who took them. Searches have turned up nothing to this day, with no indication of where they are, if they're dead or alive. No suspects have ever been found either. All 4 of them appeared to simply vanish into thin air, much like the other children, all of whom also still remain missing. Their disappearances unexplained. But one thing remains common among all cases. Each child knew of one person before they vanished, Mr. Smile.